Welcome to Startup Different. I'm Dave, your Chief Podcast Officer. With me is my brother and podcast sidekick, Chris. We're two successful entrepreneurs paying it forward by debunking startup myths, tackling the toughest challenges, and giving you the tools to build your business. As a species, we tend to imagine that the effort required to do something, a podcast, for example, is low. We're all armchair quarterbacks, thinking, psh, I can do that. But the reality is that things are rarely so simple. Instead, the people behind the idea found a way to take something complex, iteratively improve how they delivered it to you, and ultimately present it in an easy-to-digest format. Exhibit A, the Startup Different podcast. Hello, folks, and welcome to the Startup Different podcast. I'm your host, Dave, with my other host and brother, Christopher. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Dave. Hi.
What's going on?
Not too much.
That's cool. I am super pumped about our topic today. The minimum viable podcast. That's what we're doing here. I want to actually give a quick shout out to my main man, Mike. Just lives a couple blocks over. Used to live on this street. So sad he moved on. But he had a really good idea, and which was to talk about basically our process of even just getting this podcast off the ground. And it actually makes for a really good lesson about business and a kind of a big topic in a lot of startup stuff, which is that MVP, the minimum viable product. Of course, we've adopted it here for the podcast, and kind of going through like, how did we iterate this thing to get to this point? And it's been a pretty interesting journey. I don't know. I'm excited. Are you excited? Maybe.
I'm very excited. Yeah. This was kind of like our thing that we did. We like after we finished and left the business, we kind of were like in no man's land, and we felt really weird. So we needed something to do, and I think this was your brainchild. Where did you come up with the idea to do a podcast, anyways?
Oh, I think a lot of it was just trying to find a way to pay it forward. I think there's a lot of weird emotions happening after you sell your business, and you've accomplished something really significant. On the one hand, you have like this, I don't want to go, this is a totally different episode actually, but I don't want to have or you have like this identity loss, you're not part of this thing anymore. You have a bit of imposter syndrome, or even like just disbelief, like, did that really happen? And I think now, or at least back then, when we first left the business, I was really focused on, how can I pay this forward? I want other people to enjoy similar success. And, I thought to myself, well, geez, podcasts are easy. I love to talk. Chris talks. And so we like to talk about business. So easy peasy, right? And we can bring it all together. But what's interesting is that, of course, it's a ton more work than we anticipated. Oh, yeah. I can't believe how much we've iterated in 12 episodes. Fun fact, we started episode 0 because of Chris's obsession with, I don't even know, computers.
Zero-based indexing. It's a software developer thing. When you have a list, it starts at element 0, not element 1. So I figured, well, let's embrace that as our podcast. I kind of regret it now. I wish we had just done an episode 1. It would have been easier.
Well, actually, we should point out too, this is the season finale of this season, of our season 1. And I think season 2, we're going to start with episode 1. I think we can.
Yeah. All right.
I think we can move on. Give up on that's one of the iterative improvements. I want to get back here to this an important data point. So I thought we could do this podcast and it'd be really easy. Just get a microphone, start talking into it, whatever. But I started looking for some data because this was a real journey, and I wanted to understand what happened here. And so I actually found a meta-analysis back in 2014 of studies on the psychology of entrepreneurship conducted by 2 German researchers, I believe. They're at least Europeans, I know that much. Michael Fries and Karl-Hein Gilnick, excuse me, Mr. Gilnick. And it found that entrepreneurs often exhibit overconfidence and optimism, more than average. It's not just that we're susceptible to, we're actually likelier than average to be really, really optimistic on what our abilities are and being able to do something. So, just want to identify our myth right away here is that you think you can do it, and you can do it easily, mostly because you're and I think that's something that all entrepreneurs struggle with at basically every stage of their business. And this is where this MVP process in particular, I think, becomes very, very important to being
just like to put out there that on the scale of over optimism, you are much higher than I am.
What does that mean?
You are
What are you
much
saying?
more, it'll be easy and there's nothing to it. And I am much, I am also overly optimistic and over, but not at the scale that you're at, just to put that out there.
Oh, I mean, let's think of it this way. There are a bajillion podcasts out there. I'm pretty aware that we're not the only business podcast, right? It wasn't this most unique idea ever. It was just trying to like, how can I pay it forward? How can I get some of this out there to people and almost like find myself at like 10 years ago and give me some of the lessons that I know now that I think would have really benefited me back in the day. And and so I thought it was easy, but basically it's actually this really skillful thing to be able to go and figure out all these nuanced pieces. And of course, we're also on YouTube, right? So we're doing video as well. And there's so much to video that also makes that complicated. And then there's, there's just so many considerations that you just totally overlook. You think you're just talking into a mic, and there's just so much more to it. And actually, what I'd like to encourage you folks listening today to do, which is, and this is definitely super self-serving, but if you don't believe me on this, just go back and listen to our older episodes and see how much we've changed, in terms of the structure and the content, and the delivery and the visuals and the audio and all of this in season one. I wonder if you could, maybe in some cases, it'd be very easy for you to tell where we've improved. For instance, I think the first few episodes I was standing. So that's an easy
Yeah.
one. But I wonder otherwise if you could see some of the more nuanced pieces and where we've gotten better and where we've gotten feedback and rapidly iterated and improved the podcast. That'll be kind of fascinating. Would love your
We
comments on that, actually.
We did a few things right from the beginning, but we definitely noticed that there were some shortcomings pretty quick after we launched a few episodes and kind of had to retool. I think a lot of it around content and structure was challenging. And some of the visual things we just misfired and had to rethink. I think of like the branding. We started off with an initial logo design and that sort of stuff.
How long did it
And
take you to make the logo? Originally, Chris made the logo. So
I think we were in a bit of a rush because we were going to a conference and we wanted to tell people that we had started a podcast and we I think in about a week we had put up our first two episodes, done all the branding, put up a website, like done the whole thing, but it was like super rushed. So
yeah,
it wasn't our best work. We've since gone out and gotten a professional designer to build a branding guide, a logo, word mark, all that sort of stuff. So we've been able to fix some of those things along the way.
I think that, but the key here, though, and the one thing that I don't want to get lost in this is that the MVP approach, minimum viable product or podcast or whatever, requires you to put something out there. There's kind of this expression, there's like this, if you're not a little bit embarrassed, it's too late. I
Yeah.
love that as an expression because that's so true. And I definitely was a little bit embarrassed of that initial product we put out there. I'm a little bit embarrassed now. And actually, another way this episode also just sort of came to be is Chris and I have been debating, like, should we go back and re-record our old episodes? We did these episodes. They're kind of rough. They're okay. I hope you like them anyway.
Mhm.
But we think it's actually better as sort of like a demonstration of how rapid iteration. And I don't think, and by the way, I don't think we've like reached peak podcast here, but it's a demonstration of like how rapid iteration can vastly, improve what you're offering in a really short amount of time. This is the MVP process. We needed a chance to learn. We needed to put something out there, so we built something. We needed to measure the results with listeners, obviously the second principle of that MVP, and discern the possible improvements. And so that is learn. How did we learn? We MVP'd this process like we did all the time in our business.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think one of the first pieces of feedback that I got was that conference that we went to about a week after we started building our podcast. And one of the conference attendees went to our website and found a 404. And I'm like,
Sick.
oh, you got to be kidding me. So, yeah.
Probably ate you
Now,
alive. I
we,
hated that when we had the apps and when we were doing all the mobile apps with App Harbor, and it was like, somebody comes over, finds the one weird thing, like a typo or like an old URL that doesn't work anymore or whatever in an app. And you're just like, yeah, but the rest of it does awesome stuff.
yeah, but they focus on the one typo and it just crushes your dreams. But, that's part of
Yeah.
it. If you're not a little bit embarrassed when you put it out there, then you waited too long. So I was a little embarrassed when that person found the 404. But, hey, we're better for it. You just got to take it with a grain of salt and swallow your pride and keep moving on.
I think the other expression in this space too is like it's a half product, not a half-assed product. You know what I mean? Like there's the other part here too, where it's like you got to put something out there quickly, but it can't be like horrendous. You know, you
Right.
have to. There's a kind of a gray zone here, um, where it can't like be so terrible that people don't even like. If we had a podcast and I didn't have a microphone, I was just yelling from across a room. Like I'm pretty sure we'd lose just about everybody instantly. You kind of have to have like a minimum sort of like table stakes level of
Yeah.
quality,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And we did do research and things like that. We did invest in some good microphones, some good equipment, some basic lighting. We watched, we read some blog posts about how to do this like somewhat correctly. But there's just a lot more nuance to it. Dave, you and I always talk about when we were building apps, it's like the pinstriping. When you
Yeah.
look at a car, the paint job doesn't look quite right until they add the little pinstriping, and you don't even know it's there, but you know if it's not. And I think there's a lot of that going on with podcasting and just business in general. Is how detail oriented are you going to get, and are you going to button up all those little details so everybody knows it's a really quality finished product?
Yeah, I know we had an episode on co-founders already, but and one of the things we talked about in that episode was like overlapping skills of co-founders. And I actually think in this particular exercise for the podcast, it's been really helpful because I'm just not as detail oriented. So I'll go in and I think I can get the basics going of a lot of this stuff. I can get us to 60, 70, 80%, maybe 90, depending on what it is. But then you'll come in and just like crush those details. And I really think that is the that pinstriping, that last 10%, that last 2% is remarkably important. It
Yeah.
is the thing that gets you to the next level, but it's also the thing that's like easiest to overlook. So I do like the point on pinstripe. Now, one thing though I really want to cover though is, so I recognize that we got different folks listening. Yeah, and I would just want to make sure that we really nail what this like MVP process is. So first off, and go down that, and then I'd like to go into a bit more detail as to like what we actually did. So I think that's functionally, I think that's the most useful for people too. So if we think about so what is, I guess, what is the MVP first off? So it's a minimum viable product mentioned in Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. Love that book. Probably it is my favorite business book. We literally bought it for every single employee that started and said, this is our business Bible at App Farmer. So that was pretty fun. I'm sure like 50-60% read it, so that's great. I'm looking at the
Read
developers. I
some
don't know,
portion
I
of
don't know if the
it.
developers read. I don't know if they read all the time, but that's okay. That's fine. It's okay. I love them. So um, but basically you have it's this iterative process. So it means that you repeat this process over and over, this build, measure, learn. So you build something, you put it out there, you measure the results, you learn from what you measured, and then you build again. So you retool and keep retooling and keep retooling. And this is hugely important. Chris will touch on in a second how we did this in other parts of our business as well. It's very, very important to go down this road. And for us, we looked at how we could do this in the podcast in sort of different chunks. So I think, we were talking mostly about like how can we improve the content and how it was delivered. What about the quality of production? Some of that's like going to be like hardware and gear and like those functions, and how can we differentiate there, or at least get to a more professional level? And then there's sort of like the listener engagement, interest, and approval, and like that kind of piece. So there's like three big pieces here, and we're not even touching on how to market your podcast or anything like that. This is very, very functional to be like, how do you just get on the internet and seem credible?
Dave, the
Yeah,
one comment I would make, kind of
sure.
tying 2 points together. So we were talking about the pinstriping and the refinement of the product and the MVP approach. And really you need that, build, measure, learn in order to figure out what that refinement needs to look like. Like you
Yeah.
don't know the refinement day one. You have to go through that iterative process a few times to kind of learn those refinements so that you can then apply them back to your product or to your podcast or what have you. So kind of an important learning right there.
Yeah, tying it together for sure. And I think like, so if I was to think about like our content, for example, there was kind of this element of like, okay, well, we want to talk about business. And then it kind of got down to, okay, well, wait, what do we want to focus on? Like, what's interesting? There's some of these, what we had to try and figure out is like, what did we feel confident talking to? And what was driving a lot of value for folks like you listening today? And what was something that we thought was like kind of like unique enough as well? It's one, again, like we're in this sea of like unending podcasts about business. So I think for us, thinking hard about that content, it was important. But then it kind of came down to, okay, wait, are we presenting this in an effective way? And you'll definitely notice a difference from the first episodes to now, where we are. So we always wrote something down. Is the first thing I'll say. I think a lot of the time you look at like some podcasts, you're like, wow, those people are so with or like most of them are scripted, but not like directly scripted. They have the talking points and things they want to understand and things they want to get to. And I think we just started doing a better job of that. And we also make sure we were tying more data to it and kind of going down, like making it feel and be, frankly, more legitimate. But that was a process. I think it's funny. I think you could have, I don't think you ever would have done this, Chris, but I think in the early days, you could have convinced me that, oh, we don't need data. Let's just get on there and let's just talk about it and be whatever. But then we're just two guys talking. I know you would never
Yeah.
actually do that. I know you would never actually do that. But you know what I mean? Like
And that's actually not the way we ran the business. The
yeah.
business was always, we were trying to find data and figure out how do we leverage that. So I think we wouldn't have been true to ourselves if we just did a podcast of us talking randomly. You may as
Yeah.
well have me out there screaming at clouds or something like that.
But I
So
also think
yeah.
it's also kind of a disservice to the listener. Like I think we think this content is important enough to put all the effort into this podcast. We better present it to you in a way that is useful and helpful and actionable. And that's something that if you just go up there and you're just throwing it up, just kind of regurgitating something, I don't mean literally throwing it up, literally or figuratively. If you're just like putting it out there, like it's not fair to the listener. So I feel like putting more effort into the content is hugely important. At the end of the day, that's the product. That is a big part of the product. So, and then there was kind of like the secondary part, which is like quality of production. And Chris, I gotta let you talk to this because you love hardware anyway. I want to say it seems
Yeah.
like I know you don't like coding to hardware, but you like
Yeah.
hardware.
Like I don't want to go too in depth on this. There's a lot of blog posts and best practices out there, but obviously we started off with some pretty good microphones. We've we've used some pretty basic webcams initially, so that's something we're going to be improving in the future. We're talking about like how to make visually the web or the podcast look better for people who are watching it on video. So there's a lot that goes into that, and we're having to learn that as we go, which is time consuming, but it's good. I think it's a good process, and we get to a better place with our podcast product at the end of the day.
I think there's some of it too. You got to be able to crawl before you walk,
Right.
right? And so I think at first, when I think about the hardware, it's like, okay, let's just get going. Let's get something going.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's kind of like, okay, what can we do about picture quality? What can we do about audio quality? What can we do about fine tuning the configuration of the microphones? What can we do about the cameras? What can we do about the lighting in the room? What can we do? All these different things. And I'm really excited for season 2 because we're gonna have some really cool stuff. Nothing's not fine right now, but it's gonna be really, really exciting. But that takes time, and then that actually dovetails into my next piece, which is like, how do we find inspiration from others? So there are lots of podcasts out there. Some of them do really, really interesting things. They present content in really fascinating ways, and finding those best practices is one thing, but then actually being able to implement those best practices takes time that is just going to be caught up in trial and error.
And we're so systems oriented too. We're sitting there saying, hey, not how do we do it, but how do we do it every time consistently without spending, restarting from scratch every time? How do we turn this into a system instead of it just being a creative energy that is, 1-to-1, 1 hour of input, gives us our one output. We want it to be, hey, how do we put 1 hour of input and get 3 out? How do we kind of scale that? So that's really what we're looking at next.
And actually, I like that as another point too, which is, understanding the scaling part of it. And I guess it's like structuring iteration and making it a key value of what you do. So let's take a step away from just the podcast for a second. And let's think about your startup and our business and all that. And I think about how iteration is rapid iteration, that MVP process is a key value of any successful startup. And for us, it was a big deal. And I like to start. One of my favorite stories. I actually think you might have told me this a long time ago, or we heard it in a business incubator. I can't remember, but it's basically this fun story about how basically they had a bunch of kids, like not preschool, but like I think they were like 6 years old, And they went up against CEOs, lawyers, MBA students, business school students, like non-MBAs, so like undergrad. And they had a contest where what it was is you had to build popsicle stick towers as high as you possibly could in 45 minutes. And this was a research study. So it wasn't just like a casual, whatever. This was the real deal. And the amazing thing was that the kids consistently kicked everyone's butts and like materially. They actually ended up building a popsicle stick tower that was 26 inches tall, which is, and then the next closest category was the CEOs, which had it at 22 inches. So like pretty material difference. And the business school students were the worst, only getting to 10 inches. And it was funny because there's a couple of key reasons. And the key reason I want to point to is the reason why the children won is that they spent their limited time trying and failing versus planning or figuring out who was doing what and that sort of thing. And I want to be careful here. This isn't about failing fast. Failing fast has super big drawbacks. This is about rapid iteration. The kids weren't failing, they were learning repeatedly. They weren't like doing it and realizing they didn't want to do popsicle stick towers. They were doing it and realizing, okay, it's better to structure it this way, less glue, more support here, this, that, and the next thing. And that rapid iteration is what helped these kids crush people that are super competent and intelligent in multiple degrees and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. One of the stories that I used to always tell our software developers, I think it's very similar to this. And it kind of goes like this. Like you have two people and they're going to build clay bowls. All right. And so what you do is you say to the first person, you got 2 hours, make one, like the best clay bowl that you can make in 2 hours. And then you go to a second person, you say, make as many clay bowls as you can make in 2 hours. Okay. And if you take the first person, the one clay bowl, and you compare it to the second person's last clay bowl, the second person makes a better bowl with their last one than the person who spent 2 hours just on a single one. And this was always, I would always tell this story to our developers because I said to them, like, when you're writing your code, hit run all the time, keep running. And the more times you iterate through that, write some code, run it, it breaks, try again, write some code, run it, it breaks, try again. The more times you do that, the better your code's going to be, just like the bowls or the clay bowls. And so I feel like when you tell this story about the popsicle sticks and the towers, I think those kids built a ton of towers that all fell down until they got to that tower that was, what was it, 26 inches tall?
Yeah.
It took
Pretty
them a
good.
whole bunch of fallen towers to get to
Yeah.
the 26-inch tower. And so, yeah, great analogy.
You know what I think too, to some extent, it's a bit of a reflection of our society. And like you think about when we go to school, you're kind of like punished for making mistakes. I mean, you are actively
Yeah.
punished. You get where you do worse on the tests, you fail the class. And I get it. Like you got to learn the thing, but the problem with that, like that negative feedback, is then you kind of end up being in this position where you're afraid to make mistakes. Like I definitely have phobias on certain things. And I know tons of my first degree was in art sci, and the number of people who come up to say, "Oh, I hate math," and it's because they were like they tried to do it and they weren't really that good at it, and then they're basically afraid of it.
Yeah, and
And
every
there's this
single
like,
quiz counts to your mark. So
yeah,
you're held back by those failures, those little
yeah,
quizzes that,
disproportionately, right?
yeah, that you
Yeah.
learned from, but you can't
So
you can't get
that's why
past
the
that.
MVP. That's why the MVP though is so like novel. That's why it's so like. That's why when Eric Ries wrote this, and it remains true to this day, is like that was such a remarkable thing that like, oh no, you can like making those, like doing this rapid iteration is about learning, and oftentimes that's some degree of making a mistake. That's why you put it out there a little bit. You're making little mistakes, small bets that you can then iterate and improve upon, and because you're learning how to make it better. And it sounds ridiculously simple. Like, of course, why wouldn't you do it this way? But it's really not the way a lot of people sort of think about this stuff. There's a real fear that putting something out there, like even Chris and I going through this, like we've been kind of having a tussle here this week going over, man, are we going to re-record all these episodes? And I think this is so great that we're not doing it, because I want to put put it all out there. This is us. This was the process. This is what happened to us. And we are better now, and we are continuing to get better. And we're going to be really good as we get to season 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. But this is how it works. This is how you build your business and how you build your startup. Um, So yeah, and I guess as a closing point here too, just to be really really clear, it's not always about product that we're talking about. Like we have popsicle sticks here, and we got the pots, and talking about some of the code there a bit as well. Can you do this process for marketing, for sales strategies, for HR stuff for the most part? Not all HR things, but a lot of them. And maybe policies for on a smaller scale. But the idea here is like this rapid iteration is not something that's just limited to product development. So
Yeah. Yeah, should be a framework for everything you're doing in your business. Just forcing that self-reflection, forcing that you're trying things and you're moving along.
So just to wrap up here, let's take this all together. Let's take a moment to take a deep breath here. What did we learn? Okay, so things appear easier than they are. You are optimistic. You will believe you can do it. You'll think you can do it easily. You're wrong. To get good at something, and really to get, particularly at something complex, and even to be able to present it to people in a simple way requires a framework. And that's our MVP. That's the minimum viable product. We're talking about this rapid iteration. We put it in action with this podcast. Give you a couple of examples today. And then that measuring, that learning, that making small mistakes and improving whatever it is, your product, your system, your policy, whatever, that's something it can be applied to your entire business. So this is an extremely, extremely important part of every startup. The MVP, minimum viable product, or in our case, the minimum viable podcast. So
Right on.
Right on. All right, sports fans, thanks so much. This concludes season 1. Chris, we did it. We didn't kill each other either.
Came close.
Came close. I'll see you later. No, but it's fantastic. We will be back after December. We'll be back in January. So start of 2024, which is crazy actually. And we will be back better than ever with some really exciting content. We got a couple of great episodes lined up already, and we're gonna have a new look, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. So thanks so much, folks. See you. Have a wonderful holiday season. If you are taking time off or celebrating anything in there, that's fantastic. And we will see you in January. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, subscribe to and rate Startup Different in your favorite podcast app. If you want to see our radio faces, check us out on YouTube at Startup Different and look us up on social. We're probably there if you are. And lastly, do you want to feature your startup on the show? Reach out via our website, startupdifferent.com. See you next time.